The studio lights were low, the air thick with tape hiss and anticipation. A voice rose toward the microphone, not chasing glory, not hunting a chart position, just searching for truth in sound. In that moment, Michael Jackson had no idea he was standing on the edge of history, seconds away from creating a song that would change music forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another untold story. This story does not begin with ambition. It begins with instinct. In the late hours of a recording session, when exhaustion dulls the mind and sharpens the soul, Michael Jackson wasn't trying to make a hit. He was trying to feel something real. He had already tasted fame at a level most artists never reach, yet he carried a restless hunger, a sense that something deeper was still missing. Success had followed him since childhood, but meaning did not always keep pace. In those quiet studio moments, he was chasing honesty, not applause. The room itself seemed to breathe with him. Cables coiled like sleeping snakes along the floor, the mixing console glowing softly, reels spinning as if time itself were being recorded. Michael Jackson closed his eyes and sang, not performing but confessing. Each note arrived with a fragile intensity, as though it might break if pushed too hard. No fireworks. No calculated hooks. Just a melody searching for a home. At that point in his career, expectations were a heavy shadow. Everyone wanted another smash, another anthem, another guaranteed success. But Michael Jackson resisted that pressure in this moment. He believed that the greatest music was not engineered, it was discovered. And sometimes, discovery happens when you least expect it. What followed was not immediate magic. The early takes felt incomplete, almost awkward. The groove wasn't obvious. The structure didn't scream radio. There were pauses, revisions, moments of doubt. Inside the control room, conversations circled around one unspoken question: what is this song trying to be? Yet Michael Jackson kept returning to the microphone, driven by something invisible pulling him forward. Then, without warning, it happened. A subtle change in rhythm. A shift in phrasing. A breath taken just a fraction longer than before. Suddenly, the song opened up. The air in the room changed. Those listening felt it before they could explain it, a ripple down the spine, a tightening in the chest. This was no longer just a recording. This was a moment. Michael Jackson didn't announce it. He didn't stop and smile. He simply sang through it, eyes still closed, unaware that history had just leaned in to listen. What made this song different was not technical perfection. It was vulnerability. For perhaps the first time in a long while, Michael Jackson allowed uncertainty to live inside the music. The performance carried both confidence and doubt, power and fragility. It sounded human. And that humanity was revolutionary. In an era when pop music often aimed for polish and predictability, this song broke the rules quietly. It didn't shout its importance. It whispered, and the world leaned closer. As the final note faded, there was silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that follows truth. The kind where no one wants to speak because words might ruin what just happened. Michael Jackson stepped back from the microphone, unaware that the line between "just another song" and "timeless classic" had just been crossed. When the playback rolled, the realization began to spread. This wasn't about charts anymore. This was about legacy. The song would go on to redefine what pop music could be. It blurred boundaries between genres, influenced how artists approached emotion in performance, and reshaped the relationship between vulnerability and stardom. Suddenly, it was acceptable, even powerful, for a global icon to sound unsure, searching, real. Michael Jackson had cracked open a door many didn't know existed. Critics later tried to dissect why it worked. They spoke of arrangement, production choices, timing. But those inside the room knew the truth. The song worked because Michael Jackson stopped trying to control it. He let it lead. As the track made its way into the world, listeners felt something familiar yet new. Radios played it again and again, not because it demanded attention, but because it invited connection. People didn't just hear the song, they felt seen by it. And in that shared feeling, music changed. Years later, artists across generations would cite that moment as a turning point. They would talk about how Michael Jackson proved that authenticity could be louder than perfection. That chasing emotion, not formulas, was the real revolution, but back in that studio, none of that was visible yet. There was only a young man, a microphone, and a song that refused to be ordinary. As the reel stopped spinning and the lights dimmed, Michael Jackson gathered his things and left the room quietly. No celebration. No declaration. Just another night's work, at least, that's what it seemed like then. History would decide otherwise. Today, that song still echoes. Not just through speakers, but through time. It reminds us that the most powerful moments in art often happen when we're not trying to be powerful at all. When we're simply honest. Simply present. Simply human. Michael Jackson didn't set out to change music that night. He set out to follow a feeling. And in doing so, he gave the world something eternal, and yet, the true impact of that song did not reveal itself overnight. In the days that followed the session, the recording sat quietly among dozens of others, just another reel on a shelf filled with possibility. Executives debated, producers analyzed, and schedules moved forward. From the outside, it looked like business as usual. But beneath the surface, something irreversible had already shifted. The song had planted a seed, not only in the industry, but in Michael Jackson himself. When he listened back alone, away from opinions and expectations, he felt it. There was a strange intimacy in the playback, as if you were listening to a future version of himself speaking across time. It wasn't flawless. It wasn't safe. But it was honest. And honesty, Michael Jackson understood, was far more dangerous, and powerful, than perfection. As the song began its journey toward release, doubts resurfaced. It didn't fit neatly into trends. It challenged radio conventions. Some questioned whether audiences were ready for this version of Michael Jackson, less polished, more exposed. But the artist himself remained unusually calm. He had stopped trying to predict the world's reaction. For the first time, he trusted that if the music was true, it would find its way. When the song finally reached listeners, the response was quiet at first. No explosion. No instant headlines. But something subtler happened. People didn't turn it off. They leaned in. They listened all the way through. And then they played it again, slowly, almost imperceptibly. It began to reshape the soundscape of popular music. Artists took note. Producers listened closely. They heard how space was used, how emotion carried the arrangement, how silence spoke as loudly as rhythm. Michael Jackson had demonstrated that restraint could be revolutionary. Behind the scenes, the industry started to adjust. Songwriting rooms changed. Performers became braver. The idea of vulnerability as strength gained ground. What had once been considered risky now felt necessary. And at the center of that shift stood Michael Jackson, not as a calculated architect of change, but as its accidental catalyst. What makes this moment extraordinary is not just the song itself, but the mindset behind it. Michael Jackson didn't chase the future, he listened to himself. In an industry obsessed with forecasting trends, he trusted instinct. And instinct led him somewhere no formula could. Years passed, and the song aged like memory, deepening, resonating differently with each generation. New listeners discovered it without context, unaware of the doubts and late-night uncertainty that shaped it. They simply felt its pull. And those who had lived through its release remembered where they were when it first reached them, how it sounded through cheap speakers or car radios, how it lingered long after the final note. Looking back now, it's clear that this was more than a musical milestone. It was a quiet declaration. Michael Jackson proved that an artist at the height of fame could still take risks, still search, still evolve. He showed that reinvention doesn't always arrive with spectacle, sometimes it arrives with a whisper. In that sense, the song didn't just change music. It changed permission. It gave artists permission to slow down, to feel deeply, to let imperfection breathe. And it gave listeners permission to connect without distraction. The irony is unmistakable. The song that reshaped an era was never meant to do so. Michael Jackson wasn't trying to make a hit. He was trying to tell the truth. And the truth, when given a melody, can travel farther than ambition ever could. Today, as we revisit that moment, the studio feels closer than ever. The dim lights. The spinning reels. The voice searching in the dark. We are reminded that history often hides in ordinary hours, waiting for someone brave enough to listen, and perhaps that is the lasting lesson of Michael Jackson in that room, that the greatest transformations begin not with certainty, but with sincerity. As the years rolled on, the meaning of that song continued to evolve, just as Michael Jackson himself did. What once felt like an unexpected turn in his artistic journey slowly revealed itself as a defining crossroads. That single moment in the studio became a quiet reference point, a reminder that his greatest breakthroughs never came from chasing approval, but from listening inward. Long after the charts had moved on and trends had shifted, musicians still spoke about that recording in hushed, reverent tones. Not because it was loud or aggressive, but because it was brave. Michael Jackson had exposed a truth many artists feared to reveal, that even legends doubt themselves, that vulnerability does not weaken greatness, it deepens it. Behind the scenes, his approach to music subtly changed. Sessions became more introspective. Performances leaned into feeling rather than spectacle. He paid closer attention to silence, to breath, to the emotional weight between notes. The song had taught him something profound, that the space between sounds could speak as loudly as the sounds themselves. Fans, too, sensed the shift. They didn't always have the language to describe it, but they felt it. Concerts took on a new intensity. Recordings felt more intimate, as if Michael Jackson were no longer performing at the audience, but with them. A connection formed that went beyond fandom. It was shared experience, and then came the realization that would echo far beyond his own career. This song had changed how listeners expected to be moved. Pop music was no longer just entertainment, it could be emotional testimony. It could carry doubt, longing, restraint. It could be art without apology. Decades later, when new generations discovered Michael Jackson, they often traced that feeling back to this moment. They might not know the studio, the hour, or the uncertainty that shaped it, but they felt the honesty embedded in every note. The song became a bridge between eras, speaking the same truth to different times. What's remarkable is that nothing about that night suggested destiny. No dramatic announcement. No grand prediction. Just an artist following a feeling, trusting that sincerity would be enough. History did the rest, and maybe that's why this story still matters, because it reminds us that the moments that change everything rarely arrive with warning. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary work, hidden inside uncertainty. Michael Jackson didn't set out to define a generation. He set out to understand himself. And in doing so, he gave the world permission to feel more deeply. In the end, the song stands as more than a milestone in music history. It is proof that when art is created with honesty instead of intention, it has the power to outlive time, trends, and even the artist himself. That is how music changes forever, not with force, but with truth. And still, the echo of that decision, to trust feeling over formula, kept unfolding in ways no one could have predicted. As the industry moved faster, louder, more crowded, that song remained a quiet compass. Producers would reference it without naming it. Artists would chase its emotional gravity without realizing why. Somewhere beneath layers of modern sound, its influence pulsed steadily. Michael Jackson had not only changed what music sounded like, he changed how it was approached. In private moments, he reflected on that period with a rare softness. There was no boasting, no claim of foresight. Only an understanding that something rare had slipped through his hands that night, something he hadn't forced. He had learned that when creativity is cornered by expectation, it withers, but when it's given room, it reveals truths even the artist didn't know they were carrying. The song also altered how Michael Jackson related to risk. Before, risk had been calculated, choreography perfected, visuals refined, outcomes anticipated. Afterward, risk became emotional. He allowed uncertainty into the process. He allowed songs to breathe, to arrive unfinished, to surprise even him. That shift would ripple through everything that followed. Listeners felt it in the years to come. Albums no longer sounded like products, they sounded like chapters. Performances felt less like spectacle and more like confession. Even silence, those brief pauses between movements, between lyrics, carried meaning. Michael Jackson had learned that presence could be as powerful as motion. That what's often overlooked is how fragile that turning point truly was. Had he dismissed the song as too subtle, too strange, too risky, music history would sound different today. Entire emotional vocabularies in pop might never have been normalized. The courage to be restrained, to be exposed, to be human, those doors might have stayed closed a little longer, but he didn't turn away, and that choice, small, quiet, deeply personal, became enormous. Looking back, it's impossible to separate the legend from that moment of humility. Before the world crowned him, before the mythology hardened, there was simply Michael Jackson in a studio, listening closely to what the music was asking of him. Not what the charts wanted. Not what the industry demanded. Just what felt true. That is why this story endures, because beneath the fame, beneath the influence, beneath the history, it reminds us of something universal, that transformation rarely comes from trying to be great. It comes from trying to be honest, and in that honesty, Michael Jackson didn't just create a song. He created a mirror, one that artists, listeners, and generations would continue to look into, finding pieces of themselves reflected back. And as time distanced the world from that night, the song began to feel less like a creation and more like a living memory that surfaced in unexpected places, late-night radio shows, dimly lit rooms, solitary drives when the road stretched endlessly ahead. People didn't just listen to it, they returned to it. Each return revealed something new, as if the song aged alongside its listeners. That is the rarest kind of music. And at its center, still, was Michael Jackson, quietly present, never overpowering, never fading. What many don't realize is that this moment also reshaped how history would remember him. Beyond the moonwalk, beyond the spectacle, beyond the perfection, there was now undeniable proof of something deeper. Michael Jackson was not only a master of performance, he was a storyteller of emotion. He understood that music could hold contradiction, strength and softness, confidence and doubt, light and shadow, all in the same breath. You can hear it if you listen closely. The way the vocal doesn't rush. The way it lingers, almost hesitates, as if deciding whether to reveal too much. Those choices were not accidents. They were instincts. And instincts, when trusted, can outlast intention. For younger artists discovering his work decades later, that song often becomes the moment of understanding. The moment they realize why Michael Jackson mattered beyond the headlines. Why his influence didn't end with fashion or dance, but seeped into the emotional language of modern music. He taught them that sincerity could coexist with greatness, that you didn't have to hide behind excess to be unforgettable. Even today, producers analyze that recording, searching for technical explanations. They slow it down, isolate tracks, study dynamics. But the real secret can't be extracted. It lives in the decision he made before the first note was sung, the decision not to chase a hit, because when Michael Jackson stopped trying to impress the world, he finally connected with it. That is the paradox at the heart of this story. The song that changed music forever was born from letting go. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of fear. Letting go of the need to be bigger than life. And in that release, something timeless slipped through. If you imagine that studio one last time, the dim light, the quiet hum of machines, the microphone waiting, you realize how close the world came to never hearing it. How history balanced on a choice so small it almost went unnoticed. One artist, trusting a feeling, refusing to rush past it, and that is why this story still matters now, because somewhere, right now, another artist is standing in their own quiet moment of doubt. Unsure if what they're creating is enough. Unsure if the world will listen. This story whispers to them across time, follow the truth. The rest will follow, and even after everything that followed, the awards, the headlines, the mythology, the quiet power of that moment never loosened its grip on the story of Michael Jackson, because long before the world called him a legend, before the weight of expectation hardened into destiny, he was still learning how to listen to himself. That night in the studio became a reference point not just for music historians, but for understanding the man behind the phenomenon. It revealed something essential, that his genius was never rooted solely in ambition, but in sensitivity. As fame grew louder, that sensitivity became both a gift and a burden. Michael Jackson felt everything intensely, the pressure, the praise, the criticism, the isolation. Yet it was that very intensity that allowed him to create moments like this song. Moments where emotion outweighed strategy. Moments where truth slipped through before doubt could stop it. Over time, people began to recognize a pattern. His most enduring work often came from periods of inward focus rather than outward pursuit. When he stepped away from noise, from expectations, from the demand to outdo himself, something purer emerged. This song was the clearest example. It wasn't designed to dominate, it was designed to express, and that expression resonated far beyond its original release. Music historians would later describe it as a pivot point, a moment when popular music shifted toward emotional intimacy without losing mass appeal. Before this, vulnerability was often confined to niche genres or hidden beneath irony. Afterward, it became possible, even desirable, for a global superstar to sound exposed. Michael Jackson didn't just normalize that shift, he legitimized it. Artists who followed absorbed the lesson in different ways. Some mirrored the restraint. Others borrowed the courage. Many didn't even realize where the influence began. But it was there, echoing quietly in phrasing, pacing, and emotional risk-taking across decades of music. What makes this story extraordinary is how easily it could have disappeared. One decision. One doubt. One producer suggesting a safer direction. One moment of second-guessing. Any of it could have erased the song's future. Instead, Michael Jackson chose patience. He chose feeling. He chose to let the song exist on its own terms. That choice carries a lesson far beyond music. It reminds us that the things that last are often the things we don't force. That meaning reveals itself when we stop trying to control outcomes. That creation, at its most powerful, comes from listening rather than demanding. For Michael Jackson, this realization didn't make him less ambitious, it made him more honest. And honesty became his quiet advantage. As years passed and his catalog grew, fans often sensed when a song came from that same place. They could hear it instantly. There was a difference between performance and presence, between perfection and connection. This song had taught him that distinction, and he carried it forward like a compass. Even now, decades later, when the song plays, time seems to fold in on itself. New listeners experience it without context, yet feel its weight. Older listeners hear echoes of who they once were. That is the mark of music that transcends era. It doesn't belong to a moment, it travels with you, and at the center of it all remains Michael Jackson, not frozen as an icon, but alive as a voice, breathing, questioning, feeling. Perhaps that is the greatest irony of his legacy. In a career defined by spectacle, one of the most influential moments came from restraint. In a life surrounded by noise, one of the loudest statements was made quietly. That he wasn't trying to make a hit, that he was trying to be truthful, and the world followed. That is why this story endures, not because it glorifies success, but because it honors sincerity. It reminds us that history is often shaped not by grand declarations, but by small, honest decisions made in uncertain moments. Somewhere, the studio lights are still low. The tape is still rolling. A voice is still searching for something real, and music is still changing, because Michael Jackson once chose to listen, and even now, the story refuses to end, because its meaning keeps unfolding with time. What happened in that studio did more than shape a song or a career, it reshaped how audiences understood connection. Before that moment, pop music often asked listeners to admire. After it, listeners were invited to feel. That invitation changed everything. Michael Jackson became not just someone people watched, but someone they listened to in silence, alone, searching for their own reflection inside his voice. As the years passed, the world around him grew more complicated. Fame intensified. Scrutiny sharpened. The distance between the man and the myth widened. Yet that song remained a fixed point, a reminder of who Michael Jackson was when no one else was watching. When he wasn't trying to prove anything. When he was simply responding to what the music demanded of him. Those closest to him noticed it too. They spoke of how he would sometimes return to that recording, not to study it, but to feel it again. It grounded him. In a life often defined by extremes, that song represented balance. It reminded him that his greatest strength was not control, but sensitivity, and sensitivity, for Michael Jackson, was never weakness. It was the source that it allowed him to hear what others missed. To feel rhythms before they formed. To sense emotional undercurrents long before they surfaced. That night in the studio crystallized something he had known instinctively since childhood, that music was not about domination, but communion. This understanding quietly influenced how he approached everything afterward. Visuals became more symbolic. Lyrics leaned inward. Even his silence began to speak. Audiences may not have consciously traced these shifts back to that one song, but they felt the difference. They stayed with him because he stayed honest. That what's remarkable is how universal the lesson became. You don't need to be a musician to recognize it. Anyone who has ever created something, anything, knows that moment. The moment when you stop asking, will this work? And start asking, is this true? Michael Jackson reached that moment in the most public way imaginable, yet its essence was deeply personal. That is why the story resonates beyond music history. It speaks to writers, filmmakers, painters, dreamers. To anyone standing at the edge of doubt, wondering whether honesty is worth the risk. This story answers quietly, but clearly, yes, because when truth enters the room, it leaves a mark. Today, the song exists almost like a heartbeat beneath modern music. You hear it in stripped-back performances, in artists daring to pause, in voices that crack instead of hiding. Its influence doesn't announce itself. It simply persists, and Michael Jackson persists with it, not as a statue, not as a headline, but as a human presence captured in sound. That if you imagine the future, decades from now, when names fade and trends blur, that voice will still feel close. Someone will hear it for the first time and wonder why it feels so familiar. Why it feels like it understands them. They won't know the studio. They won't know the doubt. But they will know the feeling. That is the quiet miracle of what happened that night. One artist. One moment of sincerity. One song that wasn't meant to change anything, and changed everything. That if this journey through music and meaning stayed with you, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video. Every action helps keep these stories alive, ensuring that the truth behind the legend continues to be heard, felt, and remembered.